Hello everyone, I'm Rizwan, and today I will tell you how I write a screenplay. So you might be asking where I get my inspiration from. For me, what I've realized is that if you're only watching films, you might not really get that much stories and inspiration. I feel like the most authentic inspiration always comes from real life and activities outside of film. So if you're doing some kind of work and you're talking to friends, that can form some kind of inspiration for your movie. Like, for example, my film Waterfront was a project that I got inspired from a friend of mine. So that was a very, I wouldn't say an easy process for me when I was writing it, but it was definitely very inspirational and motivational for me to actually sit down and write because that is usually very difficult for me. So if I sit down to write something that I really want to say, that feels like it's a easier way to express. And another thing that I try to do is I try to watch different types of films, content, documentaries that are not related to something that I usually watch so that I can get different types of inspiration. I'm not just stuck in the same type of bubble or thing. I try to watch things that I don't even like so that I can see if there's something I can learn from it. It's all for me just a way of inspiration, and also it's important in life as well because you have to experience different types of things so that you really grow as a person and eventually you're also growing as a writer. Another way that I get inspiration is when I'm at my day job or I'm studying. I try to daydream a lot. It's something I don't try, it's just, it naturally happens. And when I do that, I try to see what I can do, what I can put together in this story. So when I'm studying or at my day job, what I try to do is I daydream. It's not something I try, it's something that naturally happens, but I do try to form things into a story and see how I can form it into a plot. And when I go back home, I have something that is already well thought out. And so all I have to do is like write it down in a notebook, or I can write it down in my laptop. So I'm not just sitting in front of a blank page not knowing what to write. I actually have something formed already. So when I go back, I can just write what was already formed in my mind. So for where I write my ideas, I try to write handwritten notes on my notebook instead of immediately going on a computer because when I write through hand, I think it's a direct contact between my mind and the paper. So I'm also not distracted by other internet or other videos. So it's more direct in terms of what I write. And I do go back and use that to write on my computer, but at least initially I can write something on a notebook and then I can go and write on my computer. So I also write on my phone because that is something that everyone has all the time. So when I write on my phone, it's not necessarily that I write the whole story. Sometimes I do, but when I write on my phone, I try to go back and write on my notebook again, and then I might put it down into my laptop. So for the screenwriting software I use, it is called Scenarist. It is a free software that anyone can download. So the reason I'm using it is, of course, because it is free, but also because it is very powerful to use. It has a lot of features and it formats the screenplay very well. So it is pretty good for me. Like so far, I've been using it for like about 2 years. So I think it's a very good software. So that is all good. You might be wondering how someone could get an idea, get a plot, and then turn it into a screenplay. Because a lot of times, a lot of us directors and even screenwriters, we don't know how to put what's on our mind into the screenplay because what is in our mind is in a very different tone and it's in a very different language than what is a screenplay. So what I try to do is I think of an idea, I put it down on all the pages like I said, and then I take out the three act structure plot points and fill it out So initially, I might have not had all that idea of how to fill it out, but once I see the three act structure plot points, I try to fill it out one by one. It might not be exact, but it is a way to start. And after you do it, you could easily go and change it and put it into the screenplay. So after you write all that down, following the three act structure, what I normally do is I try to see which scene could be divided into which location. So if I write that, oh, this guy is sitting in his room, so you already know that it is a room, so it's a interior, it's a room. So depending on where you want to set it, it might be daytime or nighttime. So you put day or night depending on what you want. So you already have the scene in terms of that. So after you write that scene heading, you could go over all the story structure that you wrote and just put it onto the screenplay software. Like, this is interior room, this is exterior street, this is in this place, this is in that place. You don't necessarily have to write anything at that time. So I normally just write down all the scene headings. And then what I would do is I would try to describe what is happening in each scene heading. So if it's interior room, it's someone is he's sleeping, or he's lying on the bed, or sitting and watching TV. So just like that, I just write down the scene description, and then I would go over and write it for like all the scenes. And at this time, you don't have to write the dialogues. You don't have to have exact character names. You just have to write the scene headings and the scene descriptions. So after you do all that, you have the screenplay, but there's no dialogue, so it's just a very rough draft. So after you have it, you can then go over and write the dialogues bit by bit, one by one. And as you do it, of course, there might be some changes. You might change the scene heading, you might change the characters, the description, the character names. So it's all normal. So as you go over, you can change the dialogues bit by bit. And another problem that I've noticed a lot of times is, for me, I get stuck on the dialogues, what to write. Especially before I was doing in this style, I often start writing and then I get stuck on a dialogue of what to write, what to say, and I just abandon the screenplay because I don't know what to write next. So in this method, when you're just writing all the scene descriptions, you already have all the things that you need. You don't have to get stuck on a dialogue to continue to the next point in the story. So after you write all these dialogues and you make sure that it is completed, you can try to proofread. I would suggest that you shouldn't proofread immediately. You should give yourself at least 1 day break so that you can objectively look at the screenplay that you wrote and you're not in a tunnel vision. So after you do this, you can go back, proofread the screenplay, and then you could send it out to your friends or other people that might be interested in what you're doing, like people you work with in film, I mean, and people who you collaborate with. So you can get their comments and then you could go back and change it. So this can happen like n number of times, really. You don't have to rush anything unless you're on a deadline, but I would suggest that you really try to give yourself some time so that the screenplay becomes the best that it can be. But at the same time, you also have to remember that it is just a screenplay. There's a lot of changes that are going to happen during the shooting, during the production, during the editing, during the release of the film. So you should take the screenplay as just its own work, alright? And you shouldn't think too much into how it has to be this, it has to be that. It's a document for the filming. That is supposed to be what it is. So I think as a screenwriter, people should remember that. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't put your artistic flavor in it. Of course you should. Of course you can. But you should try to remember that at the end of the day, screenplay writing is going to be turned into something visual. So you should be focused more on conveying the visuals rather than trying to make it too detailed and too much of like a novel, because a novel is, there's a place for that. That's a different type of writing. But screenwriting, you I think it really comes with experience as you write. At least that's what I learned. I have written most of the films that I've directed, so I try to think from a director's point of view automatically. So I think in that way, I'm kind of just writing for myself. But if you're writing for someone else, I think you do have to sit down with the director as well after you wrote the screenplay and try to work together how to change it according to the vision, and how to make sure that you guys have the same vision. So at the end of the day, movies are a collaborative process. So there's that. Also, I do like to say that just because someone has said something about your screenplay that is not good or not positive, it doesn't mean that you automatically have to change it. You have to think critically whether what that person said is working for the overall story or not. Sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes what they suggest, it might be okay in terms of that singular scene context, but when you look at the overall film, it has to make sense as well. And you as the writer is the one who has the vision for a long time. So you're the one who should decide whether that is going to work or not. And of course, you might make some mistakes in that, but you gotta try to be objective at the end of the day. And even if you cannot be objective, you still got a lot of different screenplays that you can write. So you have to learn from trial and error and experience. So after I write, when I go into the direction mode, I try to bring in the actors and let them read out the screenplay. So by doing this, what I can see is whether what I wrote is making sense or not, and whether it's something that is what I've envisioned or not. So sometimes what I thought was good on paper, it doesn't really sound good when people read it out. And you gotta remember, when people read it out, that is most important. It's not about what is written. So, because movies are going to be a visual medium, as I said earlier, it's going to be acted out. So the screenplay has to be a document for that visual translation. Because of that, you might have to tweak certain things, you might have to take out certain words, and obviously sometimes you have to change the actor as well because you really want that line to be said in a certain way, so you hire a different actor. Most times, I think, even for big productions, I don't think they can really change a lot of the actors. You gotta work with who you have and collaborate in terms of that. So I do suggest that you don't stick too harshly into your words. You should try to see what is working in reality as well. At least that's how I wanna write. But I do understand if people have a strong connection to what they wrote and they really want the lines to be said exactly the way that they wrote it. And sometimes it does work. It is what is needed for the film. So that call is something that you have to decide for yourself. Some pro tips that I would give is you shouldn't always be thinking about whether you can make what you have written or not. As a writer, even though films are a document for the filming, I think it's good to express in your writing first, and then you could think about how to make it practical, and you could see how to bring what you wrote into the actual vision. So I do suggest that at least the first draft you gotta write for yourself. You gotta just let out whatever that you're writing, and whatever kind of story you want to tell, and then you can go back and try to tweak certain things. Also, I know this might be a little controversial, but I do want to say at the end of the day, what matters most is the story. You gotta do what is important for the story. I think people gotta realize it is not about them. Of course, part of it is them, but you as a writer are expressing a story, and the story has to come true first instead of yourself. So you shouldn't be the barrier in terms of the story that gets out, and just say I'm working for the story and this is not about me. Maybe this is something that I've seen, something that I've experienced, but this is not about me anymore. This is for the audience. This is for the people that I'm writing for. So I think that is quite important for people to give a good story, I believe. So, as I've said earlier, I also believe that you shouldn't just watch movies and try to make movies. You should actually go out and experience the world. Trust me, I think it is so important for people to have a fulfilling, interesting life. Otherwise, you don't really have any interesting things to write, and you're also not living a good life at the end of the day. So I think it is important to try new things, do things that you don't like, do things that you're not comfortable with. I think whatever it is, you're gonna have some kind of experience at the end of the day, and it's going to help you. And even if you don't write, it's still helping you because you're growing as a person. I myself, outside of film, I have a lot of interests in conspiracy theories. I have interests in fitness. I have interests in some political things. So all these things, I'm very interested in it, and eventually it might inspire me to write a story. But I'm not just focusing on that. I try to look at it in an overall objective way, and just live a life, and I believe it helps me more than just watching a lot of movies. I also believe that you gotta see where your values lie, especially when you're writing a movie. You gotta understand where you stand. As you write, sometimes you find yourself and you understand different aspects of yourself. Something that was very repressed inside of you, it starts to come out as you write, and I think it is natural. It is okay. Um, I also think that as you write, you learn a lot about yourself as well. I think that is why writing is so important. Not just screenwriting, but also novel writing or diary writing or whatever type of writing. I think it brings certain part of you. It is a way of expression. Just like filmmaking is an expression. So you gotta really spend time understanding yourself and seeing where your values lie and who you really are. That could take time, but you should try to do it. And especially I think if you're facing some kind of like inspirational block or writer's block, or you're not sure where you are in life, you really gotta try to see what your roots are, who are the people around you, and that could really help you in the end, I think. As a writer, I think it's also very important to be able to be bored. I think a lot of people nowadays have this constant need for stimuli, and this they don't have the attention span anymore. So once they get bored, they immediately go on their phone or watch some videos. So I believe that as a writer, you really have to be okay with being bored, because when you get bored, your mind starts to relax, and then many different ideas come out. If you're able to do that, and you really are able to just not think too much, I know that is hard, but if you really focus your attention on not doing anything, beautiful things happen. A lot of different ideas come out, and I think it really helps in not just writing but just life in general. So I think you should be able to be okay with being bored. So the last tip I want to give is you gotta be able to kill your darlings. The reason why is that you gotta be objective in your writing. You couldn't just be too positive or too negative. You gotta try to see what is objectively going on in the story, whether it's right for the story or not. Instead of, oh, this is too cringe, this is too weird. It's not like that. I've seen blockbuster movies. Recently, I even watched a movie called The Interview, which was just really really cringe and silly, but they still made it. They still put it out, and it was a blockbuster. So there is an audience for that as well, right? So many people went and watched it. And there are some films from all around the world where, it becomes so successful and people talk about it, but when you watch it, it's so weird and cringy and silly. So whatever type of movie it is, whatever type of writing that you're writing, there's always going to be some kind of audience for that. So you gotta understand that and be just okay with it. And even as a writer, I think sometimes, not sometimes, but a lot of times, even if it's silly or weird or cringe, it doesn't matter. You're still being like, you're still telling the truth in terms of yourself. You're expressing yourself. So I think sometimes that is more important. And when you do that, I think the audience also respects that more than someone who is trying to fake everything and trying to be very polished. Yeah, I think sometimes these kinds of weird things might be more authentic, basically. So that is just my opinion in terms of this. So yeah, so this is the video, and I hope this video was helpful. Do let me know in the comments if you want to see more of these types of videos. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.